Welcome to Navigating Freedom in Federal Retirement, the beacon for federal employees navigating the complex waters of retirement planning. We recognize your unique challenges, deciphering intricate policies and optimizing your benefits. Your host is Jeff Gill, a seasoned financial wealth advisor committed to demystifying this journey for you. Our strength? A team of renowned specialists, policy experts, financial strategists, healthcare consultants, and more. Each episode aims to transform confusion into clarity, offering actionable insights and strategies. Federal employees, it's time to turn apprehension into action. The path to a confident retirement starts here. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the show. My guest today is David M. Walker. Dave Walker, a prominent advocate for fiscal responsibility, served as the 7th Comptroller General of the United States and head of the GAO from 1998 to 2008. He has held leadership roles in the private, government, and nonprofit sectors. He was head of 2 ERISA agencies and one of 2 public trustees of Social Security and Medicare. Dave served as CEO of the Comeback America Initiative and previously served as the first president and CEO of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. With over 15 years of full-time federal service and extensive private nonprofit sector experience, he has authored 4 books, received numerous domestic and international awards, and played a key role on various boards and advisory groups. Dave holds a BS in accounting from Jackson University and a senior in management and government certificate in public policy from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, and is a graduate of the National Defense University's Capstone program. He also has 4 honorary doctorate degrees. He currently resides in Alexandria, Virginia with his wife, Mary. Your book, America in 2040, Still a Superpower, provides a wake-up call about America's future. Please briefly describe the key challenges you see in the horizon that may affect the impact on retirement planning for individuals.
Well, first, it takes 4 things to be a superpower in the modern age. You have to have global economic power, global diplomatic influence, global military capabilities, and global cultural influence. The U.S. has been a superpower for a number of years, and from a practical standpoint, it was the only real superpower until recently, because the Soviet Union and now Russia never was a global economic power, nor did it have global cultural influence. But now we have a rising China. We have alliances against U.S. interest. So we face challenges on a number of economic security and national security fronts. With regard to this topic that we're talking about, the major thing is that the U.S. government has lost control of its finances. It needs to put its finances in order. We've gone from less than $1 trillion in debt when Reagan became president, to over $33 trillion and growing rapidly. In addition to that, when you look at unfunded pension, retiree health care, Social Security, Medicare promises, the number is not $33 trillion. It's over $125 trillion is what the real hole is, and growing faster than the economy. So the government is going to have to restructure its finances, and that obviously is going to have an implication on virtually every American to differing degrees, including federal retirees and federal employees.
Yeah, definitely difficult times. In your book, Comeback America, you discuss the range of policy and operational reforms needed to secure America's future. How do these reforms relate to ensuring retirement security for the average American?
Well, first, Comeback America was a national bestseller. It came out in 2010. But the more recent book is America in 2040, Still a Superpower, which was updated in February of 2022. And that has specific illustrative solutions of what we need to do to put our finances in order, including for things like Social Security and Medicare and tax policy, et cetera, because all those are going to need pretty fundamental changes in order to be able to get us where we need to be. You know, what we're talking about is what do we need to do to promote more economic growth, more opportunity, more stability, more certainty, more predictability. And obviously, those are things that are not only important for job security for federal workers and others, but also for retirement security, to be able to help plan appropriately for a reasonable standard of living in retirement and throughout retirement. Because one of the things you got to keep in mind is, until recently, we've had longer lifespans. We had a temporary setback within the last few years because of COVID. and because of fentanyl. But COVID's over, and hopefully we're eventually going to get the border secure and be able to do something with regard to the fentanyl influx. Then we'll go back to increasing lifespans.
Definitely a lot of questions there. Delivering on the promises focuses on measuring and leveraging human capital in business. How can individuals apply those principles, David, from this book to enhance their human money for a more secure retirement?
Well, the fact is the most valuable resource that any organization has, public sector, private sector, not-for-profit sector, is their people, or what I call human capital. Human capital being something that you ought to invest in rather than a resource, which is something you consume. Candidly, there are big differences between the federal government and the private sector. I mean, in the private sector, people are paid for skills, knowledge, and performance, and there's more differentiation than there is in the public sector. In the public sector, it's more uniform. People try to achieve more uniformity, if you will, with regard to what they're doing, and less flexibility. Frankly, the public sector tends to have better benefits than the private sector. For example, the federal government has now moved to a base defined benefit system and a supplemental defined contribution, the Federal Thrift Savings Plan, but they still have a base defined benefit. It's modest, but they still have it. Most people in the private sector don't. And something that the federal government has that very, very, very few employers in the private sector have, including major employers, is retiree health care. And in the government, you only have to work 5 years and retire, and you're eligible for retiree health care. Frankly, I don't think that's going to continue, in the future for younger employees because it's so costly. So there are fundamental differences, but I think there are lessons that can be learned from the private sector that can be applied to the public sector. And I think the other thing is when I was head of the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, we made major transformational reforms, including in the area of human capital. And a lot of those reforms helped to, improved our productivity, improved our results-based outcomes, improve the views of our employees, the views of our client, and the credibility of the organization. And a lot of those are transferable and scalable to other parts of the government.
Excellent. In Retirement Security, one of your other books, you address the baby boomers' retirement crisis. How can readers of this book navigate challenges in Social Security, Medicare, and personal savings to achieve more secure retirement?
Well, we have to, remember what's the three-legged stool, so-called three-legged stool for retirement income security. The first is Social Security, which is supposed to be the foundation. But like a house, you can't just live on the foundation. You need to build upon that foundation. That foundation is a virtually universal program that is a defined benefit system that provides higher benefits as a percentage of income for people of lower income and lesser benefits for people that are higher income. And it's also indexed to inflation. And then people also need to understand that Social Security is not just retirement income, it's also disability, it's survivors. There's a number of things that is part of it. So the first thing we need to do is that we need to reform Social Security to make it solvent, sustainable, and secure, because it's not now. The so-called trust funds will go to zero within 10 years. If we do nothing, there's an automatic across-the-board cut of 20% and growing to everybody. That's not only inequitable, but it's politically unacceptable. We need to make these reforms sooner rather than later, likely to be gradually increased in the normal retirement age like we've done before, but spread over many years. Likely to be a significant increase in the taxable wage-based cap. Likely to be a modification of the benefit formula to provide somewhat higher benefits for lower income retirees and somewhat less benefits for upper middle and upper income employees. Likely to be a look at the cost of living indexes. And there's likely to be a consideration of providing automatic supplemental savings on top of the defined benefit, that would piggyback on a concept like the Federal Thrift Savings Plan, where people would have an ability to invest to be able to provide supplemental income beyond Social Security that could benefit from the type of arrangements that the Federal Thrift Savings Plan is. Last thing, you have to build on Social Security with private pensions and personal savings. For the federal government, that's the base defined benefit and the Federal Thrift Savings Plan. And then beyond that, it's more than home equity. It's other investments and that one might have in order to provide a reasonable standard of living in retirement. And I think it's important for people to understand that in the latest book, American 2040, still a superpower question mark, I have in there specific illustrative reforms that were supported by 77 to 97% of representative groups of voters in America. Reforms dealing with things like budget controls, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare, taxes, defense reorganization, government organization operations, and political reforms. 77 to 97%. The truth is, the people are way ahead of the politicians. They're willing to accept tough choices as long as they're part of a goal-based plan consistent with principles and values that bring people together rather than divide them apart. We can talk about that some if you want.
All right. I personally agree with you 100%. It seems your books, most of them emphasize fiscal responsibility and sound financial planning. David, what advice would you give government employees and individuals in the public sector with these unique retirement challenges?
Well, first, fiscally, which is obviously our tax and spending policy. The government's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, and it's going to have to make some tough choices. Those tough choices mean that we have to reform social insurance programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, to maintain a strong safety net, make them solvent, sustainable, secure, but they're on an unsustainable path. So tough choices are necessary. Sooner rather than later, good, so that we can get the miracle of compounding working for us rather than against us. Secondly, healthcare is a big challenge. We've way overpromised in healthcare, and demographic trends and the fact that we spend almost 20% of GDP on healthcare and get below average healthcare outcomes. We need major transformational reforms in healthcare, and so people need to understand they're likely to have to pay more for healthcare in the future than they might think they might have to pay. Secondly, as I told you before, the federal government's unique in that people can be eligible for retiree health care, which is very, very generous with fairly modest amounts of service, if you will. And I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think that will be sustainable. That doesn't mean that you're going to take away from people that already have it, but it means that people in the future may not be able to count on that. Long-term care, unless you're poor and eligible for Medicaid, there are no federal programs, whether it be for employees, retirees, or for the general population that deals with long-term care. And long-term care can be very expensive. We have longer lifespans, which is good as long as you're healthy. But if you're not healthy and you need nursing home care or other types of care, that can be very expensive. And it's not just health care. It's living expenses and housing expenses and things of that nature. So people need to think about that. With increased uncertainty about what the future holds with regard to the federal government, the role of the federal government, how we're going to put our finances in order, that means more volatility. More volatility in the market, more uncertainty. And so people need to think about, among other things, it means people need to be saving a lot more. They also need to understand that tax rates, individual income tax rates, are never going to be lower than they are right now. They're going to have to go up. The question is how much and when. And so therefore you need to think about that with regard to your tax planning. How much of your supplemental savings do you want to do in traditional IRAs versus Roth IRAs? Those are just a few examples, Jeff.
Yeah, it's all great stuff. Our country, you mentioned healthcare as an issue, and I know that other countries you can buy the same drug, the same dosage and everything else for 1/10 of what we pay here in America. So do you see our government working to try to get those costs under control to make healthcare more affordable? Does it have to be as expensive as it is?
Well, there has been some legislation that gives the government the ability to negotiate for prescription drug prices. The VA's always had that ability. I've been an advocate of that for 20 years. And there was legislation that was passed that gives the government some ability to do that. It's not broad enough. It's not fast enough. All right. The other thing we need to think about is that we're one of only a few countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise prescription drugs. That just drives utilization, disconnects the patient from objective medical advice. And as a result, it's something we ought to think about not allowing. There are many things that I think we can and should do in order to try to be able to get better control of healthcare. Interestingly, You got to have three things in order for any system to be successful and sustainable. Properly designed incentives that encourage people to do the right thing, discourage them from doing the wrong thing. Adequate transparency, including cost and quality, in order to provide reasonable assurance they will. And appropriate accountability if they don't. Guess what? For healthcare and several other things, we're 0 for 3. That's a strikeout. There's no wonder the system is broken and needs fundamental reform. And it's time that we recognize that and get on with it incrementally.
It definitely needs reforms, that's for sure. David, on how has the economic impact of COVID-19, which you mentioned in America in 2040, affected retirement planning for Americans, and what steps can they take to adapt these changes?
Well, a lot of people ended up retiring early as a result of COVID-19. And I think COVID-19 has fundamentally changed the workforce. I don't think we're ever going to go back to where we were. I think we're going to have, more people working at least part of their week at home. Although my personal view is that 3 days in the office and 2 days at home is probably the optimum mix, unless you're in the job that you actually have to physically
right.
Be at the, you're making something or whatever else where you have to physically be there, if you will. I think it's also raised challenges with regard to the federal government's infrastructure. We now have a huge amount of excess infrastructure because we don't have people, back in the office. So I think there's going to be big changes there. I think the other thing you have to think about is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has, good aspects and bad aspects. And I think one of the things you're going to see is because of, financial pressures and the evolution of technology, you're going to see a lot more things being done by the federal government are going to be automated. And that means there's going to be less use for as many federal employees that there have been in the past. And I think you also see a move coming down the pike where there's going to be a desire for more devolution, meaning to devolve more responsibilities to state and local governments from the federal government because the federal government has grown so big. I mean, before the income tax, before the Federal Reserve, and before direct election of senators, the federal government's total spending as a percentage of the economy was 2.5%. Now it's 25% and going up, 10 times bigger. That's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable.
Very, very true. And David, in your books, they offer solutions to various economic and physical challenges. Can you share some of the vital, actionable steps for our readers, for your readers and the individuals that can apply to improve their retirement prospects?
Well, here's the key. In my latest book, which again is American 2040, still a superpower ? Which you can get through Amazon, the publisher with Author House. You can get it through Barnes & Noble, but online. You have to order online because I self-published it. I wasn't looking to try to make money on it, just while I can impart knowledge. And it's just-in-time printing. That has specific illustrative reforms to a long number of areas we've talked about that 77 to 97% of representative groups of voters agreed with. I call that a win. All right. And so now what we have to do is we have to get our elected representatives who have been laggards rather than leaders in trying to make the necessary reforms to get on with it. And by the way, something else that I've been arguing for at least 12 years is a statutory fiscal sustainability commission that will engage the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices about a number of these issues, that will make a package of recommendations to the Congress for a guaranteed up or down vote. That would deal with social insurance. It would deal with taxes. It would deal with health care. It would deal with a whole range of issues. And there's now increasing support for that. The so-called Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a bipartisan group in the House, supports it. The Speaker of the House supports it. The Chairman of the House Budget Committee supports it. And there's increasing support in the Senate for it as well. So if that happens, I think there's a glimmer of light and a glimmer of hope on us being able to do what needs to be done to try to make sure that our future is better than our past.
It'd be great if they can all pull together. But it's a bigger task than what it seems sometimes.
Yeah, well, Jeffrey, I think if people think that we're going to be able to make these tough choices in a piecemeal fashion through the regular order, they're hallucinating. It's not going to happen. I mean, we can't even pass a budget on time. We can't pass all the appropriations bills on time. You know how many times that we passed a budget and all the appropriations bills by the beginning of the fiscal year, which is October 1, coming right up on it?
Right.
Or in my lifetime, that is an F-.
Right. No, it's definitely too many negotiations and people lobbying against political special interests and everything else in these budgets. So it is a problem.
One of the things we got to do is do something that No Labels, which I'm a national co-founder for, I should say, that we've been arguing for a number of years. It's called No Budget, No Pay. If Congress doesn't pass the budget and all the appropriations bills on time by October 1, then they don't get paid and they don't get retroactive pay, and they stay in session until they get the job done. By the way, there's at least one state that did that because they had a problem, and they hadn't had a problem since. And it's one that you wouldn't guess, California.
No, you wouldn't guess that. But that sounds like
California.
That is a great solution to when you impact someone's checkbook. That's for sure.
Well, that comes back to the incentives, transparency, and accountability, right? Let's take Ukraine as a quick example. We ought to support Ukraine, but we shouldn't be sugar daddy. We shouldn't be writing a blank check. What we should do is we should tell Ukraine, look, we've already contributed multiple times the GDP of the European Union, okay, for us, multiple times. There are certain countries that have done more, but in the aggregate, we've done more. So what we're going to do is, all right, we did that, but going forward, we will match what the European countries give you. So all of a sudden, the pressure's on the European countries to come up, and we'll match them. That's fine. But quit coming back to Uncle Sugar, expecting we're going to give a blank check when, frankly, we're broke, and we got other needs that we got to deal with, for our country, including, by the way, sealing our own border.
Definitely, I agree 100%. In your book, Come Back America, you emphasize the need for political reforms. How can political changes impact retirement politics and financial security for retirees?
Well, first, we now, in my view, have a republic, which is supposed to be a representative democracy that is not representative of nor responsive to the general public. And so we need a number of political reforms to make it representative of and responsive to. Things like redistricting reform, where the purpose is to maximize competition consistent with the Voting Rights Act rather than to minimize competition. Things like integrated and open primaries. Things like ranked choice voting. Things like campaign finance reform and 12-year term limits. Those would fundamentally change our system, revitalize our system, give strength to what I call the sensible center right, center left, which is where a vast majority of the country is. Right now, the wingnuts, people on the far left and the people on the far right, are disproportionately represented in Congress. They don't want to compromise on anything. They think that's a bad word, okay? And as a result, we have stalemate. And if things were going great, don't worry about it, right? But things aren't, and we are declining. And so we need to make tough choices in order to turn things around, in order to make sure that our future will be better than our past in a whole range of areas, including issues of retirement security.
Excellent. David, can you provide some insights on the principles of fiscal responsibility discussed in your books that can contribute to a more stable economy and environment for retirees?
When I engaged the public in 2012, I did a 10,000-mile, 27-state national fiscal responsibility bus tour where I engaged the public and got the 77 to 97% agreement. And it was largely funded by the late H. Ross Perot Sr., may God rest his soul. Basically the objective there was we want to reduce debt to GDP to a reasonable and sustainable level. It's too high now. It's going much higher. All right. Secondly, it's going to take both social insurance reforms, reprioritizing, reducing projected discretionary spending, and more revenues. It's going to take all three of those things. Reasonable people can differ on what the makeup should be, what the allocation should be, but it's going to take all three. And thirdly, we need to have reforms that are consistent with principles and values that bring people together rather than divide them apart. And the 6 principles and values we got, I think 98% agreement on, something like that, okay, off the top of my head, were pro-growth. Since we're focused on debt to GDP, as long as the denominator grows faster than the numerator, we're making progress, even if we're not paying down debt, which, by the way, is what happened after World War II. So pro-growth, socially equitable. We need a solvent, sustainable, secure social safety net for those who are truly in need. Culturally acceptable. We're not a socialist nation, and there's a limit as to how much the American people are going to allow themselves to be taxed, because most of the innovation comes from the private sector, not the public sector. So the bigger the public sector is, the more you crowd out the private sector. Fourthly, mathematical integrity. No funny assumptions, no two sets of books. Make sure that the numbers work, okay? Fifthly, politically feasible. That means that you have to pass the House, pass the Senate, which generally takes 60 votes, unless it's budget reconciliation, and get the signature of the president, unless you can get 2/3 of both houses and you can override a veto. And then last, it sounds redundant to the fifth one, but it's really not. You need meaningful bipartisan support. You need to get, e.g., at least 20% of the minority party to buy in, because if you don't, the American people won't deem it to be fair, and it won't be sustainable because control flips quite frequently for one part or the next. And so if you don't have meaningful bipartisan support, it's not going to be a sustainable solution.
Well, the only way that'll ever be accomplished is having leadership that can reach across the aisle and work together.
You're right. The biggest deficit we have is a leadership deficit, and we haven't had a president who's focused on these issues since Bill Clinton. Nobody since Bill Clinton has been focused on these issues. Both political parties have been fiscally irresponsible, okay? And only the president is elected by all the people and has the bully pulpit to be able to use to go directly to the American people and try to rally support.
I believe you're right, and that's the last time we had a balanced budget, I believe, as well, right?
Well, the first 4 years I was Comptroller General, we had surpluses, and 2 of those years we actually paid down debt. And I remember, I think it was 2001, when Alan Greenspan, who at that time was chairman of the Federal Reserve, was worried because he thought we were going to pay off all the national debt. And I didn't work a nanosecond about it because I know how Washington works. And in 2003, 3 things happened that convinced me things were out of control. And since then, it has been a nightmare.
Yeah, I agree 100%. In America in 2040, you discuss lessons of history. What historical examples can individuals learn from when securing retirement in uncertain times that we have now?
Well, let me give you 2 negative lessons and 1 positive lesson.
All right.
And again, this comes in the context of making sure that America remains a superpower, making sure that our future is better than our past with regard to economic growth, opportunity, reasonable levels of inflation, etc. Rome lasted over 1,000 years, about 500 years as a republic. Yep. The republic fell, and then an autocracy after that. There are several reasons that Rome fell. See if these sound familiar. Fiscal irresponsibility, political incivility, moral decline, overextended military, and inability to control its borders. Those sound familiar?
We watch you're looking in the mirror.
Yeah, we need to learn from history. All right. Secondly, George Washington, our first president, the father of our country, even though he never had any children. He gave us several warnings when he left. Avoid excessive debt, avoid foreign wars, avoid regionalism, and avoid factionalism, which he meant political parties. How are we doing on those? Not too well. Right. Let me give you a positive example. Switzerland. Switzerland was on a troubling path with regard to debt to GDP. Earlier this millennium, 85% of Swiss voters voted to adopt what's called the Swiss debt brake, which is to limit the growth of the government and how much debt as a percentage of the economy that the federal government could take on. Since then, their economic growth has taken off. They don't have an inflation problem. Their level of GDP per capita is like top 3 in the world. They have the best credit rating of any major nation on earth. Okay, so that's an example of 2. Those are 2 examples of lessons that we don't want to repeat. Okay, or that we need to learn from. And Switzerland is an example of one that that did the right thing to help us to get to where we need to be. And I advocate for 2 things: the fiscal commission I talked to you about before, and then a constitutional amendment that will limit how much debt as percentage of the economy we can take on, with very limited exceptions and a supermajority vote and the signature of the president for those exceptions. Those are critically needed, and I'm working on those and other areas to try to help make sure that our future is better than our past. Not for me, not for my kids, but for my country and my grandkids.
I agree 100%. Well, how interesting it's been having David M. Walker with us today, and I want to thank you for being here.
Jeff, good to be with you. All the best.
Thank you. You've been listening to Navigating Freedom in Federal Retirement. We'll see you again next week on the next episode.
This concludes another episode of Navigating Freedom in Federal Retirement podcast. As federal employees, your retirement journey is unique. and we're here to guide you every step of the way. With host Jeff Gill and our lineup of experts, we aim to bring clarity to your path ahead. If you found value in today's conversation, please share it with a fellow federal employee. Remember to subscribe for continued insights. Until next time, here's to your informed and bright retirement future.